everyone. Good afternoon. And I want to say thank you very much for joining us today for this forward-thinking edition of Arcview Access, where we will be taking a deep dive into the multifaceted hemp industry. But before we get started, I have an audience participation exercise, if you will. In the chat button here on the side, I'd like for you to put in where in the world you are calling in from or zooming in from, and also if you've ever heard the term ESG before, and focus on our environmental impact, sustainability, and our circular economies. It also allows us to ensure that the social programs, the social equity programs that are really important for us have a chance to flourish, as well as creating an industry that is compliant and just. So now that the US has also rejoined the Paris Agreement, we should see more companies joining what's called the Climate Pledge. So the Climate Pledge was founded by Amazon and Global Optimism in 2019 to commit to net zero carbon by 2040, which by the way is 10 years sooner than what the Paris Agreement calls for. So far, there are 53 companies that have signed on to this pledge, and there are more on the way. So how does this initiative, plus the focus on ESG, create opportunities for us in this hemp space? So my pleasure to welcome to the stage next is David Abernathy. He's a principal at Arcview Management Consulting. He's going to be moderating our great panel today and can't wait to get started. Thanks, David. See ya.
Thank you, Kim. Really excited to be here talking about industrial hemp. I got involved in the cannabis industry about 12 years ago, and ever since day one, I've been really waiting for hemp in general and industrial hemp specifically to start to take off. I think it has unbelievable economic value, and it can be a really important part of our sustainable development as a planet. So I'm really excited that growth has really started to take hold. And I'm very happy to introduce our panelists today. So if you can turn your cameras and mics on, we've got some really amazing experts in a variety of different fields that touch the hemp plant and the hemp supply chain. So I'd like to give them a chance to give a brief introduction of themselves and a little bit about the work that they do. Roger, why don't we start with you?
David, pleasure to be here, and especially sitting next to this amazing panel that you were able to pull together to talk about industrial hemp. As you indicated, my name is Roger Frawa, and I'm with the Santa Fe Farms group, and generally representing generically American Indian tribes, of which there are 577 tribes geographically spread across 33 states here in the United States, and another handful of 650 First Nations up in Canada. And so I've done a lot of work with many of those tribes and First Nations around natural resources, and very excited to be here in the new natural resource called hemp.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us. Deanna?
Hi, David. Really nice to be here, and thank you for having me. And I'm really honored to be amongst the panelists here today. A little bit about my background. I started as a medical anthropologist looking at sociocultural factors that affect the determinants of health, and became a filmmaker to be a storyteller, to be able to tell those stories, and then followed up by going into academics so that I would be more of an expert in those fields, and ended up doing a PhD looking at the media's role in shaping policy issues. And recently I've just been working with audiences to take complex and disparate issues and make them accessible to larger audiences. I got into hemp a couple of years ago when the Farm Bill passed, and a dear friend of mine at Santa Fe Farms, Stephen Gluckstern, who's the CEO, asked me to join him in his endeavors. And it's been quite a ride. Right now I'm the Chief of Staff of Santa Fe Farms. And our goal is to take hemp and to effectuate change so that we can create a better, healthier, more sustainable world.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us. And David, I think you're muted, David.
So I'm just going to give my whole speech while I'm mute. Read lips. So first of all, thank you for having me. I'm really delighted to be here. It's quite a distinguished panel, and I feel fortunate. I feel lucky to have been invited. So I'm a professor at UT Austin. I guess I'm one of the people that early on was playing around with taking natural precursors and making advanced carbons out of them. So making biochar out of coconut shells and other things preceded me by probably maybe 1,000 years, something like that. But I think it's fair to say that our group was one of the first to start making really quite competitive advanced carbons out of natural precursors. So we did hemp first to make graphene out of it. We've also done things like we've done peanut shells, waste milk, eggshells, paper mill pulp sludge. I mean, the list was pretty exhaustive. We've since kind of moved on to other things because you can't, I ran out of natural precursors and started doing other things in my time, but it's great to be here. And I've done a little bit of trying to understand where these advanced carbons fit. And I think I may be able to add some value to the discussion there. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. And Brenda.
Well, I'll add my thanks to the group for the invitation to be here. I'm a fan of hemp and actually of cannabis too. My background is in anthropology, like Diana. I'm a cultural anthropologist by training or vocation, and I've spent quite a bit of time in South America. I also have a Brazilian passport, studying shamanism, and eventually moved to the US and to LA, where I ended up combining anthropology and journalism and storytelling and launched Rodeo Drive and flotation tanks. But soon realized that I had a lot of friends in the luxury business in Italy who were interested in the fact that I was here. And so I ended up representing companies like Fendi and Versace and so on, Ferragamo and others. And in that process, brought hemp to Armani and created a hemp ecogenes line. And that excited Woody Harrelson so much that he took his plane and came to Milan and just to congratulate Armani. And Armani made him 2 dinner jackets, one in white and one in black hemp. I was using Chinese hemp at the time. And then I was asked by L'Oreal to create, and this is like some 20 years ago, a cosmetic line based on hemp oil. And but my main focus over the last 35 years really has been developmental issues, and that has evolved into what's now called climate smart agroecology. I'm the founder of an NGO called Pro Natura, which was born in Rio, but then internationalized after the Rio conference. And we've deployed probably over $1.6 billion in 63 countries to address poverty and food security. So I've been working a lot in agriculture in developing countries. And I'm very interested in biochar. I've been using biochar on my projects, on our projects, since about 2002. And with amazing results. We're looking at, we can turned sand of Sahara into 11 harvests a year with camel dung, biochar, and quite a bit of elbow grease. But today, the real focus is really about how to address our climate crisis. I think it should be everybody's focus. And I'm very interested in working with Santa Fe Farms and all passionate hemp advocates to move hemp into a kind of activist role in the climate discourse.
Great. So for much of human history, hemp has been one of the most widely cultivated agricultural crops, and its uses continued to expand as the Industrial Revolution took root. But then the United States came in and effectively banned hemp cultivation in the 1930s, which, because of the US's influence on the global economy, really put hemp into sort of a state of arrested development, despite the fact that it continued to be legal in many countries. Now that hemp has been re-legalized in the United States with the 2018 Farm Bill, we find ourselves with this crop that has unbelievable potential across a huge variety of different industries, but we lack the supply chain infrastructure to produce it at scale. What are some of the challenges that you've experienced in the hemp space, looking at this very nascent supply chain?
So I'll begin. So first of all, the video that we just saw was fantastic because it touched upon the history. And you're right, hemp is a nascent industry in the United States, but it's really, we say that because the Farm Bill passed in 2018, but really our relationship with hemp is since the Pilgrims landed in the 1600s, in the early 1600s. And the first hemp laws weren't in the 1930s in our country, and it wasn't about the 2014 research bill or the 2018 Farm Bill. It was really the first hemp bill that was passed in the US was in 1619, requiring farmers to actually grow cannabis. And cannabis was actually used as money in the early days, and you could actually pay your taxes in our country for the first 200 years in our country's history. And the reason why I'm talking about histories is because it's important to understand the context of where we are today and what we could do with hemp. And it's the same things that we could do in the early part of the 20th century before hemp was squashed down. And we were talking about paper and fabrics and fuel and electricity and oil and food and medicines. And of course, we could actually do them much better today, given our technology. And you may or may not know that the Declaration of Independence was written on hemp, or that Henry Ford had a car made out of hemp, or that the film referred to the Popular Mechanics article, but that article also came out with 25,000 uses of hemp. But it was when Hearst Paper and Kimberly-Clark and DuPont, who was actually just started making plastics from oil and coal, and then these big paper makers were threatened by the potential losses of billions or perhaps even bankruptcy. There was a smear campaign against hemp and cannabis, and specifically marijuana, with this whole notion of reefer madness. And laws were passed, and it set technology back more than 100 years and essentially halted what would have been the beginning of our own green movement. So can you imagine if we had been growing hemp for these products instead of cutting down trees, how much carbon we actually could have sequestered over the last 100 years? But so I would say the first challenge in the industry is when you're looking for big funding in this, what we call a nascent industry, is that we need to change the narrative. We need to change the ideology around it. And so hemp has really specific regulations for us in the United States. It has to be below 0.3 THC, and getting people to understand the difference between hemp and cannabis, even though it's genetically the same plant and they're cousins, it actually just takes time. And on our own farms, we had many challenges in hemp. You know, when we first started growing hemp, we had grasshopper infestations. We had to repair farm equipment in the middle of a season. We had weather challenges, we had water, we had mold. And we discovered, like many of the farmers who had come into this industry just to grow hemp, that when you partner with Mother Nature, she always wins. It's not even a choice. So one of the other biggest challenges for us was offtake, though, and it may not seem like a climate-based challenge, but one of the primary things that we need to do in order to hit the critical volume of hemp to make positive change in this world is for someone to actually buy it. And then there weren't processing facilities or decorticators or anyone to make products from hemp. And really, there were no best practices because anybody who was growing hemp in the early part of last century isn't alive anymore to tell us what to do. So we aren't able to get advice on how to grow it. So the industry actually took a lot of time to evolve and the supply chain along with it. And we had this attitude, you know, if you grow it, they will come, but it wasn't really an ideal strategy for this type of industry. So to create this industry, we need to educate consumers. And by educating consumers, we'll create demand for ethical, sustainable, healthy products that will help heal the planet.
Absolutely. We're very focused on the industrial hemp supply chain, and there is a delicate sort of chicken and egg situation that needs to be solved. Building up the processing without the cultivation doesn't work. Building up the manufacturing without the processing doesn't work. So all of those need to work in concert. Roger, can you talk a little bit about the potential for hemp as it relates to American Indians and First Nations?
Yeah, I was so happy to hear Deanna talk about it from a hemp from a historical standpoint, even using the words when the Pilgrims landed. So maybe this is a good place for me to pick up after the Pilgrims, in fact, have landed. You know, when the Pilgrims landed, and the tribes, I think, historically have been sovereign nations, and the 577 federally recognized American Indian tribes today are, in fact, sovereign nations. So when those sovereign nations act, similarly situated to Indian gaming, cigarettes, alcohol, and some of these other industries, you know, we think that hemp, because it is an agricultural product and it is a natural resource, that really we have 53 million acres, primary water rights. And I think that there's a lot of agrarian background that's part of our traditional cultures with many of the tribal groups. So when you start thinking about what hemp represents today, really it presents an opportunity, I think, for environmental, social justice, and economic justice by allowing tribes to help lead this industry, because I think we are starting from a blank sheet of paper in terms of where this sector is at right at the moment and where it can go. So I think where it can go is that tribes bring, I think, that ability to take their cultural backgrounds and partner with the industry. And I think to partner with the industry, there really is a real opportunity here for building trusted relationships between tribes and the industry, because I think tribes have regulatory permitting and some tax advantages that might create some very unique situation and opportunities for the industry and tribes to come together and to start exploring outside of state regulations and alongside of federal regulations. So maybe there's a way that we can move faster and quicker and then more sustainably, because I think that tribes generally have the sustainable and environmental context about much of their developments as kind of one of their main pillars. So David, I think that looking at industrial hemp and looking at tribes as a trusted partner in this new sector makes a lot of sense. And I think the challenge there is just finding ways for the industry and the tribes to be able to connect, and where they connect and how they connect could be determined by the industry and the tribes exploring where's the best place for us to connect at. We're working with Santa Fe Farms, and when we started talking to Santa Fe Farms about some of the opportunities we have in terms of that 53 million acres of federal land and primary water rights, they asked very quickly, what's some of the bigger challenges? And we said, well, housing, because our tribal populations are growing at 4% per year, doubling every 18 to 20 years. Housing is a real challenge. And we know that industrial hemp can be utilized as a very well insulated wall material. And it is, in some cases, it's fireproof. So it makes a whole lot of sense, I think, as a well insulated fireproof housing and building material. So when Santa Fe Farms came and started asking about not only the opportunities, but exploring what the challenges were, that told us a lot about their credence and how they operate and where they operate from. So I think that it's that kind of partnership that makes a whole lot of sense for Indian country. But I think there are opportunities for Indian country and industry to work together in this brand new sector called industrial hemp.
Yeah, absolutely. We've at Arcview have been talking for about a year now to a First Nation in Canada, working on a plan to develop a sustainable industrial hemp industry to provide everything from fiber for things like building materials to hemp grain for feeding both humans and livestock, as well as just generating a sustainable source of revenue for the First Nations. So I think that definitely there's a really important role that American Indians and First Nations can bring a really, really strong background in agriculture, as well as the ability to control their own destiny from a regulatory standpoint in ways that's not always possible in, for example, the United States or Canada. David, I'd like to ask about hemp's potential for use in advanced technology. We hear a lot about graphene, and I'm curious to sort of explore what role hemp might play in utility scale energy infrastructure and power storage. But why don't we start with sort of what is graphene and why is it important?
Graphene is, actually, it depends who you ask. If you go on Wiki, there's a wonderful artist rendition of graphene of these really pristine, well-ordered basal planes of graphite. So it's a single atomic layer and it has this really orderly bonding, and the stuff that people got the Nobel Prize on really was quite similar to the Wiki schematic. If you look at real graphenes that are being made in any kind of quantity, so the stuff that the Nobel Prize was awarded for was, I believe it was literally made by peeling some graphene off it was like, I don't know if it was a pencil, but it was something where you just use Scotch tape, and it was not a manufacturable process. If you look at people that have made graphene even in large quantities, large being like grams, or potentially kilograms, it's a fairly messy stuff. So it's effectively flat carbon, really flat carbon, and it may be orderly, may have these really well defined atomic arrays, or it may be really disorderly. So it may be just full of defects, full of oxygen, full of nitrogen, full of sulfur, full of hydrogen. I mean, you name it, right? Primarily oxygen, OH groups. It may be full of holes. It may have all sorts of edge structures to it. And over the last 20 years, I think a lot of my colleagues have come up with almost a taxonomy of what graphenes are. And there's been entire articles published by joint opinion of XYZ academics in terms of what could be considered graphenes and what can't be considered graphenes in terms of their structure, their chemistry, and their functionality. To me, I think really I would put graphene in a bin of advanced carbons. So a lot of the stuff, for instance, that we do now, we don't even call it graphene. And we actually say it's, it's nanoboxes or has, different morphologies. And I think graphene fits quite well as a subset of advanced carbonaceous materials that are extremely useful for, a vast number of applications. So the original 1.0 application was actually biochar, right? And people made it on the beach, they made it in the Amazon, you make it when you roast coffee, right? Basically any kind of a pyrolysis process that you're not burning it, you're keeping oxygen out and you're kind of getting rid of all the volatiles. Soil remediation, obviously, but if you look at a kind of advanced carbons in general, they get used for water treatment, for air treatment, for filtration. They capture, aerosols out of the air supplies. They filter drinking water, right? Like every municipal system, water system typically has big, granular, big bags or big canisters of, granular carbons. They use for catalysis, for supercapacitors, for, additives, for, concrete. I mean, you name the application, but in each case, it has its own structure, its own chemistry. So I think one of the pushbacks I always give when people go, well, I have this great graphene and I'm going to use it for everything. You go, well, but that's not how it works. And if you talk to carbon scientists, if there was only a single graphene, they'll be out of a job. So at the end, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of different carbon chemistries, carbon structures, and each one really works well for its own application. I think, the problem I see with the low-end applications, so if you want to make something that's really kind of inexpensive and really kind of low performance for hemp, is that you're competing with a lot of other materials, frankly. So, people make activated carbons from wood, they make it from coconut shells, they make it from, you name it, you could literally go outside, pick something and make activated carbon out of it. So you're forced to really rely on the natural structure of hemp to give you unique high performance carbon products, which have some value beyond, beyond $200 a ton or something like that, right? And for that, I think, you almost have to treat it like any other technology where you have to navigate the intellectual property space. You have to think about cost of manufacturing, whether you could do it in the United States, how automated it can be, what are the EH&S costs. So there's a lot of people that get really excited about, let's say, making graphene in the laboratory, and a lot of them will actually use my old formula. So the stuff that we did 10 years ago, where they'll add a huge amount of caustic agents, and they'll say, well, I made graphene from hemp, so it's sustainable. But you go, yeah, but you added, lye, you added potassium hydroxide, and you can't even dispose of this stuff. It's not recyclable, and you literally need a chemical plant to be able to make this stuff. Is that a sustainable way to do it? So I think if advanced carbons are going to move forward in the United States, you need fairly robust intellectual property, kind of a network, which I think people in the, let's say in a lot of fields don't think about the freedom to operate. So you made this stuff and you're selling it, and you go, okay, well, whose patent am I violating? Who's going to? So they need a robust intellectual property position. They need fairly robust manufacturing supply chain, which has kind of gone away to some extent in the United States. There's nascent, facilities, but you need, there's no turnkey operations right now, right? Things have to be modified. Things have to be either built from scratch, or you have to go to, let's say, some facility that's being underutilized. And you need to treat it as a technology that has to achieve a certain cost per kilogram to make, or else people are just not going to pay above that. So even if it works twice as well as something else, if it costs 10 times more, it's just not going to happen. So I think there's huge potential with hemp because there's a lot of it in North America. It's not like coconut shells where the closest place is Hawaii. It's fairly straightforward to work with. So you can make a lot more advanced carbons from hemp fiber than you can from, let's say, softwoods or hardwoods. It's not as, doesn't have as much lignin, so it's easy to make, flat carbon. It's easy to make graphene out of it. But you really have to treat it from a technology where you have to have the IP, you need to have the manufacturing supply chain, you need to have your costs down. Otherwise, it's it's nice ideas, but it's going to make it difficult to do in the United States. That's what I say.
Excellent. Thanks, Brando. David mentioned biochar. Can you talk a little bit about biochar and what some of its uses are, and what the potential is to use hemp as a feedstock for biochar?
With pleasure, and but my video has been stopped by the host, so
Yes,
you'll just hear my disembodied voice.
Sorry, Brando, sorry, your video feed wasn't coming in clear, so we're just gonna have you on audio for now. Apologies.
Okay, good. All right. So if I may, first, I'd like to add something about what Diana was talking about, which is the history of hemp. And just because Italy has played such a role for centuries in the hemp business, historically, we've been the second producer of hemp after Russia. And at some point, up to the 50s, we had about 80,000 hectares, whatever that is in acres, double plus something, of hemp growing. And paradoxically, the reason why hemp in Italy stopped being grown and used was for environmental reasons, because the maceration of hemp, which was done in open fields, was incredibly smelly, and people were complaining miles away. So we basically stopped producing hemp, which we'd been doing, as I was saying before, for centuries, because we had a long history of maritime republics, Venice, Pisa, Leghorn, and so on, and they used a lot of ropes and a lot of hemp for their sails. And Genoa, which was one of the four republics, was well known for its hemp fabrics, and that eventually was cut and turned into jeans. So we have some degree of intellectual property rights on the word jean. But the problem with with hemp in textiles is generally that the quality has been very low. I know that now, for instance, obviously we use enzymes to macerate or to treat the hemp fiber when we want to weave it, but there are there's still issues around quality, so you tend to blend it with other fibers, from cotton to silk to viscose, and that allows for a much better product at the end. And I think that as the technology improves, hemp is going to be used again more and more in the clothing business. Although, Calvin Klein also, I remember, made 20 years ago, after Armani came out with his hemp line, made hemp sheets, and obviously found some way to make them soft enough for people to sleep on. So just wanted to add that to Deanna's storytelling. The use of biochar is today biochar is called the third green revolution. because it is such a impactful substance. At some point, you can develop forms of biochar, which are activated carbon, or what David was talking about earlier about, complex high-tech materials. But biochar really became discovered in the Amazon because we had a problem, and that was that we found remnants of cities, and some of them in the 14th century were bigger than London. There were cities of 50,000 people on the riverbanks. But archaeologists and anthropologists doubted that a city could survive, because that kind of population density needed a fertile soil, and the soil of the Amazon is not fertile. So this conundrum was solved when we discovered, not we necessarily, but the discovery of Terra Preta dos Índios, which is black earth of the Indian, which is an incredibly fertile soil, which is about 800, 900 times more fertile than the soil around it. And that soil, and it's, there are trenches, and it goes down maybe 3 yards, maybe sometimes more. And that is an example of terraforming which started about, we believe, 11,000 years ago, where Amazonian Indians realized that by adding ground charcoal to the ground, that brought about some extraordinary changes to the soil. And it really came out of observation. But in practice, today, when we use charcoal on soils, especially on very depleted soils, the results can be spectacular. On average, we have yield increases between 50 and 200%. We discovered biochar because in 1998, we were trying to address the problem of deforestation in Africa, which is very closely linked to charcoal and to firewood. Actually, 70% of the deforestation of Africa is caused by the charcoal and firewood being used to cook foods. So we were trying to figure out a way to substitute charcoal with a green charcoal, and use agricultural waste to do that. Well, we've done that, and at the time, we had a factory in northern Senegal near Saint Louis, and our technology, which was a pyrolysis technology, won the best technology for the Developing World Prize at the Altran Foundation. So we got a call a few days later from a professor at Cornell called Johannes Lehmann, who said, "Brando, I congratulate you on your prize, and do you know you have the best biochar technology, at least at the time?" And I said, "Well, thank you very much, but what is biochar?" We were just compressing this black powder coming out of our pyrolysis machine and giving it to a women's cooperative to test it in their huts very often. And that's how we got into biochar. And then we started distributing it to farmers around our factory, and we saw that maize increased 200%, that onions increased 50%, that rice increased 100%. And actually, the world records on rice production are from India and from southern India, Kerala, and they can produce 16, 17 tons per hectare. In Africa, they produce 2.5 to 4 per hectare. And that's because they add biochar. So, we can go into the science of it, but what biochar is an amendment which, when added to the soil, brings forth an extraordinary amount of changes to the mycorrhiza, to the acidity of the soil. It makes it more alkaline. But what actually happens is that it is a home for bacteria, fauna and flora, if you want, which is incredibly conducive to the growth of plants. And the results are amazing, especially when you're dealing with the kind of soil that I see around myself and here in New Mexico, which is arid, sandy soil with very little life in it. Well, biochar is an activator of a whole bunch of processes, and now we have 20,000 studies on it. And in the case of hemp, I've been trying to find some published studies on the impact of biochar on hemp, but I hear that the few studies that have been made are closely held by the hemp growers who have funded them. I'm actually very interested in starting a research project here near Albuquerque on our hemp farms and using hemp byproduct to make biochar and put it back in the soil. If nothing else, it's a very elegant example of a circular economy. The other thing I will say, which is really interesting, is that it cuts the use of water because of the structure of biochar absorbs water. And so you can cut down water use. Well, in our case, in the Sahara, we cut down 85% of the use of water to grow legumes and vegetables.
Excellent. Yeah, really a huge opportunity there to start using some agricultural techniques that were developed long ago and in many parts of the world have been lost. All right, I think we're going to jump into Q&A from the audience. So with that, I guess we'll bring back Louis Hahn from the Arcview team, who has been going through some of the questions that you all have asked.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks so much, David. I really enjoyed the discussion here and learning about all the different applications that hemp has in this growing new field. Lots of really interesting stuff going on. Thank you so much for sharing your insights there. So we do have a little bit of time for Q&A, and let's see what questions that we have from the audience. So first question is for David Mitlin. Could you talk about which specific advanced carbon uses do you think hemp fiber is best suited for? In other words, which advanced carbon products could or should hemp products be developed for first? Oh, you're muted. Let me see if I can help you out. We
Sure.
wish we could read lips, but
I'm going to talk on mute the whole time. I don't know how to read lips. So again, I'm going to start with the premise that there's no one advanced carbon that will fit every need, right? So you kind of have to tailor the structure, the chemistry, the morphology to the given application. And this is my view of it. Obviously it's my view. The places where advanced carbons derived from hemp, including graphene, could work potentially very well and be transformative because of cost and because of US-based supply of the raw precursor versus, again, like coconut shells, which, as far as I don't grow on mainland, are air treatment so pulling aerosols out of the air, in potentially in HVAC systems, water treatment, as additives to concrete, certainly, as value added additives to energy storage materials. So they're not the primary material. They're not the, they're not the meat and the potatoes. They're the sauce, the gravy. So things that make the devices run at higher power, last longer, prevent dendrites. So prevent for next generation, metal batteries, which is what I'm working on, prevent them from electrically shorting at high charging rates. For all those kind of applications, carbons, including hemp-derived, and in general, advanced carbons have been shown to be transformative in general. The question is, can you make it at cost where it becomes interesting, right? So like I said, one of the things to remember is just because it works twice as good, it doesn't mean someone is going to pay, never mind 10 times as much, they're going to pay twice as much for it, right? Think of your car. If you have twice the range on mileage, you're probably not going to pay twice as much for the car, right? There's a lot of these kind of trade-offs where you could get better performance, but it takes some thought to figure out whether you can meet the costs. I think those are the big, I'm trying to think what other, for tonnage, like if you just want to say, we want to make tons of the material, I believe probably like HVAC and air treatment type of technologies and water treatment are the biggest tonnages. For niche applications where you could actually, make real gadgets and kind of sell for potentially, relatively high price, energy storage materials, additives to concrete. Those are the big ones.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's interesting to hear how hemp could be applied in things like battery technologies and the other applications that we talked about. So thank you, David. Next question is for you, Roger. Sounds like you might know this person. This person is Kami Akavan. I hope I said that right. Kami says, good to see you. The question is about tribes and partnerships. So many tribes have been misled by fast-talking entrepreneurs who are pursuing their self-interest versus looking to uplift tribal communities. They're understandably skeptical. How can entrepreneurs prove their reliability and develop trust with tribal communities so market-leading business practices can better align with the vast resources available to Native Americans and First Peoples in a manner that will best serve tribes?
Louis, thank you for that question. And I think it's just really boils down to the human condition, all of us being really who the creator intended us to be. And I think, for instance, when we first met Stephen Gluckstern in the Santa Fe Farm group, they demonstrated just almost intuitively with their curiosity, not just, again, asking what are the benefits for industry, they very quickly followed up with what are the challenges that you're faced with. And I think that when you can approach a tribe, which is really just a large extended family, with that kind of curiosity about, how's your day going? What's troubling you? How can we help you? I think it's that kind of an approach that I think can make a big difference, because I think it's no secret the $30 billion a year that comes into Indian country through Indian gaming or tribal casinos, that there is some business sophistication, there is some political will in terms of tribes being able to conduct some business. But I think on new frontiers like this is not just for those tribes that are near the large urban areas that have had European contact for a very long period of time. This is really, this hemp industry is for those tribes that are rurally based, who are poor, who are large land-based tribes out in the middle of the West in terms of grow and the demand and the need for housing and housing materials based on hemp and hemp bricks for construction. So I think it's really the human condition of just coming to the tribe and being your authentic self, whomever that is, and then let the tribe get to know you and you get to know the tribe. And I think that based on who you are and how you're positioned, and I don't mean exactly exclusively on just a business basis, because tribes don't sit there with a kind of a gatekeeper looking at your tax forms, or looking at your bank accounts. They really try and invite you in and look at who you are as a human being and start from there. So I would say look at the Santa Fe farm model and follow that kind of a model about how to approach Indian country. There was a lot of respect right from the very beginning.
What a plug. I'll be following up with that with Deanna, but no, I mean, you're completely right, Roger. Having worked with so many entrepreneurs, and they ask similar questions. How do I work with investors, right? And it's all about just being your authentic self, right?
Yes.
Aligning your values. We're all humans at the end of the day. It's not just about me, but what we could do together so that 1 + 1 can equal 3, right?
Yep, exactly.
I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but it did. So, but thank you so much, Roger. Deanna, over to you. That was a good segue. I'm going to wrap up a few questions into this. A lot of people are asking about ecosystems and infrastructure, right? We touched upon that at the beginning of this webinar, where we had sort of stalled hemp production in this country. And so in some ways, despite the rest of the world going on and continuing their hemp industries, we kind of have to start from square one despite our history. But it's interesting what you've done over at Santa Fe Farms, because you've created a solution end to end. And so how are you building that? What are some of the opportunities and challenges that you see? And how are you imbuing these sustainable practices into the business model that you've created over at Santa Fe Farms?
Thanks for asking, Louis. And it's always difficult to follow Roger because he's so eloquent. And thank you, Roger, for your answer. We believe that Santa Fe Farms is creating a story that will resonate with everyone on the planet, not because we're minimizing our own carbon footprint, but because we believe that it allows others to minimize their carbon impact as well. And so I'm going to start, we have a whole ecosystem of companies that we have under the Santa Fe umbrellas, but I'm going to start with our growth companies, which are our seed, genetics, and cultivation. And each one of these businesses is based on regenerative farming practices. And we have a business that's solely dedicated to helping farmers develop SOPs and best practices so that they can create their own regenerative farming practices across the country. But it's our transformation businesses that are really the heart of Santa Fe Farms. And these include our own processing and extraction facility that we're building now, as well as factories that we're creating to build the carbon sequestering housing that Roger referred to. And I want to dig in here for a second, because if you think about hemp and the three, we think about it kind of as a three-legged stool. And if you think about that and its impact on sustainability, we're going to be addressing, or we are addressing, all aspects of the hemp plant and its potential impact on sequestering carbon. And so, the first part, or the top of the plant, is the flower. And we're creating health and wellness products and lifestyle products that were born out of and grounded in regenerative agricultural practices. And we know that there's a sophisticated audience out there that will be buying these products, and that these consumers will choose these products based on their carbon footprint. And our plan is to actually have a carbon score printed on our labels. And the second part of that stool goes to the fiber on the outside of the plant. And as we break down the plant and burn it in an anaerobic system that we talked about through pyrolysis at a high temperature, at a low and slow, we're able to create the biochar that Brando's talked about. And we're also creating advanced carbons such as graphene, and we're already doing this. And as David told you, it's one of the most electrically conductive materials known to humans. And we believe that we'll be replacing lithium and sodium ion batteries in the future with this material. And the third leg of the stool is the inside of the plant, or the herd. And from this, we can create housing products and building materials that will sequester carbon for 100 years. That'll remain a constant 72 degrees on the inside under extreme conditions, and that will be fireproof. And so this has extreme implications for the future of housing, and to work with people like Roger to address the housing issues in Indian country and First Nations. That's an opportunity for us. That's really incredible. But really, making change or progress is meaningless without measurement. And so we currently don't have a rating system for how how much carbon a company actually uses and whether they actually create impact or not. And by taking measure, we can create and correct course as we go. And to that end, and to make improvements in our own supply chain, we're creating HempTracks, which is a supply chain as a service blockchain-based platform. And we're doing this with Global Logic and our partner Sindesi. And this not only tracks carbon usage and labor and material costs of carbon usage, but also it attracts efficiencies that companies have added, like carbon capture or clean energy generation or insulation, or even lead construction practices, or even a company's travel policies. And by tracking these variables, we hope to be able to give a carbon score to our products. And with this carbon score, we can track use, which makes us, which it lets us make improvements to better our score and correct course along the way. And then we can make a positive, conscious impact on the planet.
Super great, the work that you're doing. One of the first of its kind, really. Can't think of many companies who have taken hemp from a holistic approach like that, but also so metrics driven, and it really gets into the data and the science of it all. Thank you so much. I think that's all the time for questions. Sorry we didn't get to hear from all of our panelists, but there's only so much time. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time here. But we will be putting up a poll here on your screen, and in case you do want to connect with our panelists afterwards for one-on-one conversations. But I want to thank all of our panelists, Deanna, David, Brando, David, Roger, for your participation, your insights into this burgeoning new field of industrial hemp and how it could be applied in such a sustainable way. So thank you so much. You should be now seeing a poll on your screen, and please take a minute to please fill this out if to give us feedback on what you heard today, as well as, of course, if you're interested in connecting with any of the panelists afterwards as well. If you found any of the particular insights interesting, we're all about connections here and enabling those kinds of relationships. And while you're doing that, let me talk to you about some of the things that's coming up on our calendar. So this webinar that you heard from today is part of our Arcview Access series, and this is something that we host each month, but it's not the only type of webinar or educational programming that we do. We have a Women's Inclusion Network, and the next one coming up is on March 1st at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, about what cannabis can learn from the wine industry with Samantha Dickinson. It's a mentorship workshop for WIN members only. And people draw parallels between the cannabis industry and the wine industry all the time. Is that fair? If so, what can we learn? So if you're not a member of the Women's Inclusion Network yet, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to get you signed up for this workshop that we're hosting on the 1st of March. We're also teaming up with Pitchforce on March 18th, that's a Thursday, at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, for a pitch competition, specifically focusing on women-founded companies in the cannabis and hemp industry. March being Women's Month after all. We want to celebrate the leadership and entrepreneurship of women in the space, and this is for accredited investors only if you are looking for women-founded businesses in cannabis and hemp. The next Arcview Access series that we're doing is next month on the 25th of March, and it's all about negotiating cannabis investments. We want to get nitty-gritty. You've heard about some interesting opportunities in cannabis. The stock market has been pretty good to the industry in the last few months. But the private equity space is where all these opportunities are born at. How do you navigate some of the due diligence nuances? Are there specific investment tools that you could use when considering cannabis investments? This is for operators and investors alike, free and open to the public. And that'll be going on the 25th of March, Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you particularly enjoyed the conversation that you heard from all of our panelists today, please do catch us at South by Southwest, and that's starting on March 16th, running to March 20th. All the panelists that you heard from today will have their own individual 1 hour-long panels, and Arcview will be there as well to continue our conversation about federal legalization. So if you enjoyed what you heard today, check us out at South by Southwest. We'll be presenting there as well. And last thing I'll say about the screen here is that, Arcview, we do more than just webinars here. Although investor and operator education is so important to us, there's multiple arms of our business, like the Women's Inclusion Network, which I've alluded to. But also, if you're serious about building your business and raising capital, Arcview Market Research is there to help guide your decisions, as well as Arcview Management Consulting. If you really want to get tactical and strategic in how you could take your business from 0 to 1. Arcview Ventures is there for early stage and seed stage companies if you're looking for capital raising as well, or capital raising assistance. And Arcview Capital is our FINRA registered broker dealer to help with everything from crowdfunding all the way to taking your company public. And so with that, I want to thank everyone for your time. Please do take a minute to finish out the poll here. But I hope to catch you on the next Arcview webinar or in one of our meetings. But thank you so much for your time, everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.